We're here with reporter Steve Cannane. G'day, Steve.
G'day, Hoagie.
What's rocking?
We're talking about torture tonight. Now, Colin Powell, former US Secretary of State this week, said close down Guantanamo Bay. He says it's harming the US's reputation as a democracy. One of the things that's been harming its reputation is the use of torture as a form of interrogation.
Oh, torture is not the most democratic approach.
No, it's not. And it's to get information, obviously, but often that information is wrong. For example, Colin Powell himself went to the UN to argue the case for war in Iraq by linking al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. Some of that evidence was gained under torture. It turned out to be untrue. And Michael Otterman, an American journalist who's actually touring the country at the moment, is arguing we should end torture. He studied at Sydney University and he actually got interested in this subject when he was studying there, and I caught up with him recently.
Sounds like a heavy story. Let's check it out.
Tell us how you became interested in torture.
I was living in Newtown with some Australian flatmates, and it was that month that these Abu Ghraib images first were released to the press. And I remember sitting there at home and seeing them and being quite affected by it. They were shocking. They were so brutal and graphic that I don't know, something stuck within me. And I found out within about a week or two of research that this is not an isolated incident. There's a history to these methods, and there's previous scandals. I stumbled across these interrogation manuals, CIA manuals from 1960s and 1980s that talk about the very same methods of tortures that you see in the photographs, specifically standing someone up for long periods of time, disorientation, using lights and sound, changing the temperatures, things like that.
The Americans in the 40s and 50s didn't like much about communism, but they seemed to like their interrogation techniques, didn't they? They stole them.
That's exactly right. During the Korean War, you have downed U.S. pilots in North Korea making statements against the U.S., and this created this fear of maybe they figured out ways of mind control to break people down. Huge amounts of money were spent by the Pentagon and the CIA researching torture to discover what the communists were using. And a lot of these same methods started popping up into interrogation literature of the CIA and used by the Pentagon.
The tactics the Americans learnt off the communists were then used back on the communists. On the Viet Cong in the 1960s, in Latin America in the 70s and 80s. When the Cold War ended, the US had less enemies, but the CIA methods of torture didn't disappear. In 1994, Bill Clinton ratified the UN Convention Against Torture, but then sent it to Congress with modifications. Modifications that allowed the CIA to keep using forms of torture like sensory deprivation and self-inflicted pain. And then came September 11.
Holy fuck!
All you need to know is that there was a before 9/11 and there was an after 9/11. After 9/11, the gloves come off.
After 9/11, you have a different change in tone, rhetoric, and these things actually come out from behind closed doors and are actually being advocated by people in power all the way up to the top. I mean, in Abu Ghraib, it didn't, there's no directive saying strip people naked and stack them in a pyramid. But it does say, you could use nudity and you could force people in uncomfortable positions. So a sadistic mind could put two and two together and actually commit these types of things.
While the US administration tried to distance itself from these practices when they were made public, it's clear they were in favour of using torture. When Sheikh al-Libi, an al-Qaeda operative, was captured, there was two options: to let the FBI use their rapport-building techniques or to let the CIA at him.
At first, he was handed over to the FBI, and according to people I've spoken to and what I've read, they were actually quite successful. Al-Libi was sharing information about who he helped train in training camps he was running in Afghanistan. Anyway, while this is going on, the CIA is observing this interrogation, and they grow restless. They believe he's holding out. And agents on the ground appealed to George Tenet, who was the director of the CIA at the time, for access to al-Libi. George Tenet goes to Bush. Bush grants access. During the interrogation itself, the CIA barges in, according to agents who were there, chains up al-Libi, throws him in the back of a truck. First, he gets sent to Egypt for what we can imagine extreme torture. He's then sent back into U.S. custody, where he's subjected to the full gamut of the enhanced interrogation methods, which includes waterboarding, when you have someone laid out on a board, you fill their mouth with water. Under these tortures, he admitted to certain things. He started saying Saddam Hussein actually had close links with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was trained in poisons and gases by Saddam. And this intelligence actually started popping up into speeches made by the president.
We've learned that Iraq has trained Al-Qaeda members in bomb making, in poisons, and deadly gases.
I can trace the story of a senior terrorist operative telling how Iraq provided training in these weapons to Al-Qaeda. Fortunately, this operative is now detained.
After he admitted to these things, torture stopped, and he retracted everything. And obviously history can show now that indeed it was all made up, but it was exploited by the Bush administration for their own ends.
Can they point to a scenario where this kind of torture has stopped a terrorist attack?
George Tenet has said, oh, these methods have saved lives, but he hasn't elaborated, and he says, I can't talk about it any further because everything's classified. In my research, I've actually come across no example of a true ticking time bomb where someone planted a bomb, was captured right after they planted it, but before it went off, the police or whoever captured him knew. He knows exactly where it is, and only torture could get these answers. And he was tortured, and he gave this information and then saved hundreds, thousands of lives. I've actually never seen this before, but this is the example used by people that defend torture. This is a scenario we see in shows like 24, and in movies maybe. It's very suspenseful drama. But in real life, I've not seen one true example of this.
So what have been the negative repercussions of America pursuing this torture post 9/11?
Well, quite explicitly, say in Iraq, there was a coalition poll taken a week or two before these images were first released in April 2004. And the poll showed about 60% of Iraqis supported the coalition, supported the occupation, what the U.S. was doing there. A few weeks after these images came out, the poll was taken again. That number dropped from 60 all the way down to 9% support for the coalition.
So it's been a PR disaster.
Oh, immense disaster. I can't think of anything less democratic than torture itself. And so it's quite counterproductive. It's just the wrong way to go about what we call this war on terror.